So I thought as an audience member, as a listener to a new piece, and to have an opportunity to hear from the mind and the musical ear in which it came from is just a really invigorating experience. So I thought I would just ask Adam a couple questions and let him just talk because he is insightful and just a wonderful, wonderful mind, humble and brilliant. So Adam, brilliant question here. Tell us about the piece.
Thank you, John. And thank you all for being here. This has been quite a rewarding project to work on. So John mentioned a piece of mine called Picture Studies, which was actually written for orchestra and then later transcribed by Don Patterson of the President's Own Marine Band for wind ensemble, and that began this process of, I guess, of getting my music out to the wind ensemble world. But I quickly learned that the majority of my orchestral pieces, Picture Studies, American Symphony, and then an actual original work that was commissioned by the University of Texas, my second symphony called Migration. Those pieces don't have a greater sense of reach. They're technically quite demanding and not a lot of ensembles can handle those pieces. And so part of the dialogue with both John and Ricky, they asked me to essentially create a new composition that stayed true to who I am as a composer, but could also reach a really good high school ensemble in most of the colleges, hopefully throughout the country. And so that began the initial conversation of how to compose a piece that could do just that. And so here we are 2 years later, and we have this work called Rise. It's divided into two movements, and the main reason for doing that was I thought, well, an organization could play both movements back to back, but someone could also just do the first movement, Rise, Beginnings, which is more of a concert opener type of feel, or someone could do just the second movement, Farewell Song, or they could bookend the movements by having the concert begin with Beginnings and close with Farewell Song, or somewhere in between. So to give a little more flexibility to the piece. But the first movement, Beginnings, begins with this rhythmic motive. And I'm a big piano improviser. All my material comes from initially through improvisation. I record my improvisations and then I transcribe them, and then I essentially become an architect and sculpt them and build the piece. But I like to think of Beginnings as one long, gradual crescendo that just keeps sort of rising and ultimately being more optimistic and more uplifting. So that's the first movement. The second movement, Farewell Song, is actually taken from my violin concerto, which I wrote last year for Anna Kiko Myers and the San Diego Symphony. And that's a very personal work that was essentially a love song to my wife. And that piece is called Orchard and Fog, and it's based on this photograph of where we were married, but in the winter we were married in an apple orchard in the fall in Massachusetts. And the premise of that piece is the first movement is present day, where this old man wanders back to the orchard where he was once married. It's very reflective and slightly somber in tone. And then the second movement is a flashback, very quite uplifting and fast and rhythmic and more virtuosic. And so it's basically a memory of his life with his wife. And then the third and final movement, Farewell Song, takes him back to present day in the orchard, and he's essentially on his deathbed, and it's his goodbye song to the love of his life. And so after I wrote that movement, I always felt it would work well for wind ensemble. And of course, one of the hardest things for composers to do is we love strings, and wind ensembles do not have strings. How do you still create some type of bed and atmosphere? And so that was a little challenging to do, but hopefully we accomplished that. And also, along the way, both John and Ricky were so invaluable in terms of what they thought could work for most ensembles when I had a question about, can I go this high for the trumpet, and how can we make this work for everyone? So hopefully that answers that question.
And that trumpet part is quite high, so you'll hear it. You mentioned sort of that motif at the beginning of the first movement in the piano. Are there other things that might be sort of clues for the listener to just kind of grab onto in either the first or second movement?
Yeah, well, my language, I guess I can demonstrate for a second. So when I was in undergrad at Oberlin, I heard Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time, and I think it's the fifth movement for cello and piano, where he uses a lot of 10th chords, which is if you take a major triad, C, E, G, and you have that in its most closed form, which is just stacked thirds, it sounds like we expect. But when you open it up in its most spread out manner, you have a 10th chord. So that opens up the sonic capabilities. something like that. So the whole piece derives from this opening, and also when a chord progression eventually emerges, but a lot of both movements are essentially harmonically based on 10th chords that progress, but you have that rhythmic pulse that carries you through the whole movement, and then the second movement has 10th chords more in a chorale-like setting. That's probably more information than necessary.
That's great. That's wonderful. Can we thank Adam for being here today?